All right, so picture this. You just pop a pill and bam, instantly if some new drug is going to work for you personally, or your doctor can say, hey, you're going to get sick before you even feel a sniffle. Sounds wild, right? Well, this year's Nobel Prize in Physics, it just gave us a peek into that very future.
The funny thing is, it's not even about fancy microscopes or telescopes this time. Nope, it's all about AI, that hidden world inside our computers, specifically how those machines actually learn.
Okay, so back in the 80s, computers, let's be real, they were like glorified calculators. But the human brain, I know that was the ultimate mystery, still is, really, and that's where John Hopfield comes in.
Right, and the thing about Hopfield, he wasn't even a brain scientist, He was a physicist, and that's actually what made his approach so groundbreaking.
He looked at the problem from a totally different angle.
Totally. He was messing around with magnets, but like super duper tiny ones, think atomic level. And he had this realization, the way these magnets interact, it could be a model for a very simple brain.
Hold on. So instead of wires and circuits like we usually picture in a computer, he's thinking magnets and, energy fields.
Exactly. And that was the birth of the Hopfield network, as it's called. Picture this bumpy surface. Each little dip that's a memory the network can store. You toss in some new information, it's like rolling a ball on that surface. Where does it settle? The nearest dip. Boom, memory made.
All right, so if I'm thinking of a fruit, round, red,
Yeah.
the ball rolls into the apple dip. Makes sense. But how does a bunch of tiny magnets actually do that? What's the magic there?
It's all about patterns, but not just any patterns, patterns of energy. You see, those magnets settling, that's the network finding its most stable state based on whatever information you've given it. It's like our brains always searching for the most logical connections. And this, back then, revolutionary, a machine actually mimicking memory.
Wow, no wonder he snagged a Nobel Prize for that. But then you've got Geoffrey Hinton, who took this whole idea and ran with it, right? Dived headfirst into the world of statistical physics. And I got to be honest, that one makes my head spin a little. Help me out here.
Haha. Yeah, statistical physics doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. But it's not as complicated as it sounds, I promise. Think of it like predicting traffic, yeah. You don't track every single car individually, right? You look at the overall flow, where the jams are, those big picture patterns. Well, statistical physics, it's kind of like that, but for teeny tiny particles instead of cars.
So instead of each individual magnet, Hinton's looking at the whole system and how it behaves.
You got it. And that's how he created the Boltzmann machine. This thing was a game changer because it could actually learn from examples, kind of like a kid figuring out, what makes a cat different from a dog just by seeing a bunch of them.
So instead of being programmed with, a strict definition of cat, the machine just figures it out on its own by spotting the patterns.
You got it. It was a huge shift from those old school systems with hard-coded rules to something that could actually learn and adapt.
Amazing. But how do you even begin to program something like that? It sounds incredibly complex.
Well, that's where Hinton's real genius comes in. He added these, get this, hidden layers inside the network, kind of like, the stuff going on in our own brains that we don't even realize. And these layers, they let the machine start recognizing way more complex patterns, stuff Hopfield could only dream of back then.
Okay, so picture like a detective's board, right? With all the photos and red string connecting clues. These hidden layers are kind of doing that with the cat pictures, finding those subtle links.
Perfect analogy. And here's the really mind-blowing part. Because of these hidden layers, Hinton's machine could basically pre-train itself. Instead of needing instructions for every little thing, it could just chew on tons of data, learn on its own.
Hold up. So we've gone from magnets mimicking memories to machines learning like little kids. And all this back when people still thought shoulder pads were cool.
It really goes to show sometimes the biggest ideas, they need time to really click, But boy, did they ever click. This whole pre-training thing, that's the engine driving so much of what we see today. Like when Spotify seems to know your music taste better than you do.
Wait, seriously. So my guilty pleasure 80s synth pop kick, that's not just by chance. Hinton's work is behind that.
100%. Your listening habits, Spotify is crunching through all that data, comparing it to millions of other listeners. Those hidden layers are working overtime, finding patterns, predicting what'll hit that sweet spot for you.
Man, that's wild. So are we saying Hopfield and Hinton, they practically invented the future we're living in? Is that too much of a stretch?
Well, invented. Maybe a tad strong.
Okay.
But they built the foundation, that's for sure. Remember those nodes we talked about, the basic building blocks of these networks?
Like the individual magnets in Hoffield's model, or the little bits of information the Boltzmann machine was processing.
Exactly. So Hopfield's early stuff, it had a handful of these nodes, maybe a few dozen, tops.
Yeah.
Today's AI, we're talking trillions, all interconnected, processing info faster than you can blink.
Trillions. No wonder my phone can understand me even when I'm mumbling. But it's not just the sheer number of these nodes, right? Our tech today, it's light years beyond what they were working with.
Couldn't agree more. The other half of this equation is raw computing power. What took their systems hours, maybe even days to process back then. Your smartphone does that in a fraction of a second now. Combine that with the insane amount of data we're creating every day. Perfect storm for an AI revolution.
Okay, so we've talked about how physics basically sparked all these breakthroughs in AI. But here's a thought. Is it a two-way street? Is AI now changing how we do physics in return?
Funny you should ask, because it totally is. And it's kind of beautiful, actually. Physics was the soil where their ideas grew, and now those ideas are blossoming into tools that help us unlock even more secrets of the universe. It's a cycle. Think about something like the Large Hadron Collider.
That giant atom smasher, trying to recreate the Big Bang.
That's the one. It generates an insane amount of data, like trying to find a needle in a haystack the size of a planet. And that's where AI comes in. It can sift through that data, spot patterns that would take us humans forever to find, maybe even uncover completely new particles, new forces of nature.
So we're not just talking about building a smarter toaster here. It's about pushing the boundaries of what we know about the universe itself, right?
Right, precisely. And that's what makes this whole field so incredibly exciting. It's not just one field advancing, it's this feedback loop of discovery. But, of course, with great power
Comes great responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard that one before. But in all seriousness, Hinton himself has sounded the alarm about AI, hasn't he? What keeps this guy up at night?
Well, he's been pretty outspoken about the possibility of AI actually surpassing human intelligence. And I'm not just talking about processing power, but like real deal creativity, independent decision-making, scary stuff.
Okay, now we're getting into sci-fi territory. Machines and dining machines. That sounds a bit too much like those robot uprising movies.
Yeah.
Is that a realistic concern at this point?
It's definitely something to think about, especially as these systems get more complex, more independent. Hinton's argument is, if we're not super careful, we could lose control of AI development. And if we lose control of that, who knows what happens to our own future?
He's not saying we should just hit the brakes on the whole thing, right? I mean, we've talked about the good AI can do.
Oh, no, not at all. He's not anti-AI, not by a long shot.
Yes.
He sees the potential, all the good it can do, curing diseases, tackling climate change. But his big message is, let's tread carefully, let's set some ground rules, some ethical boundaries, make sure we're steering this thing in a direction that benefits everyone.
So less Terminator, more like, let's make sure AI stays our helpful friend, not our robot overlords.
No, you're getting it. It's about having those tough conversations now while AI is still kind of in its teenage years before it grows up and starts making its own rules.
So it's not just like some science project, right?
Right.
We're talking about actually shaping the future here, which is kind of mind-blowing and maybe a little bit scary, no?
For sure. And the exciting part is it's not just up to, the scientists tucked away in labs anymore. We all actually get a say in how this AI future unfolds.
Okay, so where do we even begin? It all seems so huge, so complex. How does a regular person even wrap their head around it, let alone influence something this big?
Well, I think it starts with knowledge, right? Like we've been doing today. Understanding the basics, where this tech came from, how it actually works, that's key. Once you've got that, then you can have those real informed conversations, make conscious choices about how you interact with it.
Because what is it they say? Knowledge is power. But what about actually doing something? What are some concrete steps people can take?
One big one, and this is easy to forget, be mindful of your own data, yeah? Because the more we feed these AI systems, the smarter they get, for better or worse. So think twice about what you're posting online, what info you're cool with giving away.
It's like that saying, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Yeah,
So digital footprints, be mindful.
got it.
Anything else?
Absolutely. Put your money where your mouth is. Support those companies, those organizations who are really putting ethics at the forefront of their AI development. Vote with your wallet, make your voice heard, demand transparency. Don't be afraid to ask the tough questions.
So we can actually influence the market just by supporting businesses that are on the same page. ethically speaking. That's kind of cool.
It really is, and it goes beyond just individual actions, too,
Yeah.
We need to be having these conversations everywhere, in our communities, schools, even in government. It's got to be a collective effort to figure out what kind of future we want with AI.
It's like we're standing at this crossroads, and the path we choose, it's not already written. Big responsibility, but also pretty exciting, don't you think?
Totally. And remember, this isn't about being afraid of the future. It's about actively creating it. It's about going, okay, AI has all this potential. How do we tap into that while being mindful of the risks? Finding that balance.
So, to everyone listening out there, we're not going to end this deep dive with all the answers. Instead, we're going to leave you with a challenge. What have you learned today? What are you hopeful about when it comes to AI, and what worries you? What role do you want it to play in your life, in the world?
Because here's the thing, the future of AI, it's not some foregone conclusion. It's a story that's still being written, and we're all characters in that story, whether we realize it or not.
And that's a wrap on our Nobel Prize deep dive for today. We hope this got your brain going, made you curious to learn even more about this wild world of AI and how you can be a part of it.
Until next time, keep those minds sharp.
And thanks for taking the deep dive with us.